Hello, this is Jyothi Robertson. Welcome to the Journey You Own. Today I'm speaking with Gabrielle Chapman. Gabby is an incredible young woman who works in the intersections of animal welfare and social justice. In this three-part interview, I have spoken with her about her upbringing in West Virginia, to her time working in the space of social justice. This third part of my interview with her focuses on her work now in animal welfare and really where she sees the future of her work.
I moved from racial justice, like mostly specifically racial justice, into animal welfare. I think that I was noticing a disconnect between the human and non-human sort of world in our social justice work, or just generally. I think there's not a lot of people that are able to bridge the gap. And I think ultimately what I want to do is, I'm actually reading Sister Vegan by Breeze Harper, and I'm wanting to figure out ways to tell the story of not just Indigenous people, or lift the narratives of not just Indigenous people, but like, it's not just Indigenous people, but it's the biodiversity that existed in those places. Or bridging the conversation of animal welfare and climate change. You know, like what are the things that we can't really do one without the other. And I think right now we're like focusing super in on like animal welfare, but like if we don't talk about how forest degradation like affects like, you know, habitat, and like that also affects like, you know, the people living there, or do the people living there have a say and what happens? I don't think we're going to solve these larger problems. So I felt like moving into animal welfare was sort of a segue into bridging sort of all of these social justice issues together.
And that, of course, speaks to what I'm doing right now, just trying to understand the impact on the climate that's happening due to social injustices that have occurred. You know, I mean, it's crossing over, and then that impact in animals, and weaving that through to education,
right,
and the impact on next generation.
Yeah, and what's kind of wild is, before coming into animal welfare, I had met like land stewards and people that are already doing like amazing environmental stewardship work, and it's mostly based in ancestral practice. And they've already named like what things are, and like, you know, and then sometimes like Western education comes in and like co-ops something that already exists. For example, like One Health, like, which I think is an amazing model, you know. But One Health is not new. Like, it's something that ancestral and, you know, for probably people from all over the world, you know, in their own way, have already like thought about. And it's sort of like we're playing cleanup from colonialism. We're like actually having to literally decolonize what we've created to like stabilize our world. And I think a lot of the work I want to do is to like amplify what already exists, and saying, you know what, like, I have a lot of respect for academia, but like academics, to really get to the root and answer the questions, you really need to be asking the people that are already experts. And it doesn't take a PhD to know what you need.
Actually getting down and meeting those that are actually with the earth, and that are, you know, that are actually farming, that are actually there, and understanding the energy from it.
And I think it speaks to what you're saying, like those folks, in my mind, are already tapped into their authentic selves, you know? in a lot of ways. And we're so removed from the natural state of things because of technology and advancements and, all these things. Not that they're bad, it's just we need to be able to figure out how to facilitate a connecting of the two.
What do you see as the potential for that? If you could create anything right now to be able to do that, where do you see impact being effective?
I don't have an answer for that, but I can see where it could go the wrong way. And the biggest thing that's on my radar right now is like artificial intelligence and like the use of artificial intelligence. I think, like, again, technology can be used in so many ways, and like it can be used in great ways and it can be used in not so great ways. And I think that my worry is because there's like this thing called algorithmic bias, and it causes it's what we use to create system learning. Because that algorithm has been created by like predominantly men and white men, it doesn't take into account maybe this indigenous ancestral knowledge. And I think that we could use AI in a way that like harnessed that knowledge, but if we aren't considerate of all people, I worry that, for example, there are certain like self-driving cars that have less of a recognition of Black people. So like, they could accidentally hit a Black person rather than a white person. Now, that's like super scary, and that's the algorithmic bias that's been built into the machine learning. Or and the same thing with research. There still is like bias within it that you just can't you couldn't account for if the researchers aren't diverse. So I think for me, like, I want to try to figure out how we can get more people into those academic settings and into the STEM fields, and like and educating people that historically haven't had access to that field or sector.
If you had to, at this point, like, I'm thinking about my daughter, and I'm old enough to be your mom, as you just pointed out with your mom's age. I'm even older than that, so if, which makes me think about how you are early in your career in many ways, and you have so much that's ahead of you. Is that daunting? Or are you excited? Like, what do you feel like knowing that you're right at that place in your career where you have so much opportunity, so many choices?
Oh, well, up until now, choice has been a problem. Because it's like, what do you do? My grandmother's like, back in my day, you could be a teacher or a nurse, and like, you didn't have a lot of options, and which was maybe good in some ways because she was less confused and she had to just do what she had to do. But for me, it's not been the case, and like, I think a lot of folks go through career changes, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Like, I don't know what my life will hold. Like, honestly, I'm like, tomorrow's not promised. I'm kind of just in this moment where I'm just trying to, stick to my values, to let my values sort of guide the way. And sometimes I'm like, I get really hung up and like, well, I could be doing this big thing, I could do anything I wanted to do. And sometimes like I let the societal like pressure pull me off track, I guess. For a while, I thought maybe I would like run for some sort of like local office or something. And, after giving it some more thought, I'm like, I don't know if that's what I value, I could probably do a lot of great work, but would I be happy, you know? So it is a little daunting, and I think I have no clue like what will happen, like, or what I'll do, or I honestly just want to be a farmer. Literally. And I say just because it's a very important thing, but I want to live on a farm somewhere and like have a simple life probably, but it's hard to do, as weird as that is. And like part of that might mean like I already grow my own food. My mom and I have a small ag farm here in West Virginia. It's super small, but you know, growing your own food and like nourishing your body and I think to me, coming from where I come from, it actually is a form of liberation and kind of like rebellious to be like, you know what, like I'm not buying processed food. I'm buying food I've grown, you know. And then thinking about land access, like, you know, Black farmers have been decimated, you know, over the last 50 to 100 years. Black land has dwindled. So in some ways, to me, I'm like, you know, what if I could feed my community? Like that would be actually such an honor. And like almost the greatest honor I could almost feel like I could give others. But it's also very like, you know, counter to what society cares about, you know. And I think that in my like generation, like there's such a pressure for sort of like these accolades and to like do this big thing, you know what I mean? So I'm working on like detachment from that type of stuff, I guess.
If you were to advise someone like my teenage daughter or young women, what would you tell them?
I think one of the most important things is like that inner child, like never lose that, you know. You like stay curious. But then the other thing is like the hardest part about my life, I think, and I'm dealing with now, is like sometimes the hard choice is the right choice. It usually is the right choice, the hard choice. But then typically the road is very lonely also. So like the road to like self-discovery and the road to knowing yourself and being authentic to you is lonely. And I think you've got to learn how to cope with that. And I think also like knowing it gets better. Like, you know, your 20s are tough, you know, but I think it's like that decade of time is so important. You're struggling through like so many different challenges around our rapidly changing world, you know, literally tech and internet and like social media, and like it's just a really tough time. And then on top of that, like your actual relationships. And I would also say like being in relationship is probably like the most important thing. And you know, not necessarily like romantic relationships, but like being in relationship with community, and like learning about what healthy relationships look like is like a almost fundamental truth. Like you have to do that. And also like, you know, not like feeling pressured by your parents. Which is tough because, you know, I always think, oh my gosh, if I have kids, like I'm going to be like so strict, maybe. And I'm like, I don't want to screw my kids up, you know? But it's like almost inevitable. Like there's something your children are going to resent. Like it's like just the natural way. I don't know. I'm like wondering how I can like raise children to not like hate me. It's wild, but you know, and to be a strong woman, you know, it's tough because you've got to make some really tough calls.
You have been listening to my interview with Gabrielle Chapman. This is Jyothi Robertson for The Journey You Own.